My name is Sarat Paşa, and I'm honored to host this very special fireside chat, with a remarkable innovator, entrepreneur, and a friend, Osman Kibar. See, Osman and I share a unique bond because we both hail from the same coastal town, Izmir, Turkey, which is like the San Diego of Turkey, I guess I could say. And a city that our families, even though they didn't know each other, they adopted almost a century ago after they moved from Saloniki, Greece. And I guess you can say our ancestors know how to choose a beach town with good Mediterranean climate. And fast forward to today, sunny San Diego, and how two Turkish Americans from the same coastal corner of the world end up here on the other side of the world, and we got to meet here in San Diego. Growing in Izmir, I heard Osman Kibar name all the time, but that was not the same Osman. See, Osman's grandfather, who is also Osman Kibar, was like a legendary, innovative mayor that everybody talked about. He was a mayor in the 60s, and he built so many roads, and he worked on so many infrastructure projects that the people in town called him, the Turkish version probably, it's Tarmak Osman, because he kept building stuff. And if you ever spend any time in Turkey, Izmir, there's no way you could walk more than probably half a mile until you see a sign on a sport complex, a playground, a street. I think there's even a tunnel named Osman Kibar. So I just assume growing in the same city, how it must have been like walking down, possibly dating and showing everyone your name from sign to sign. But I'm sure it also came with some serious expectations. And again, I guess we can clearly say that you forged your own extraordinary path. Because for starters, Osman earned a double degree from Pomona College and Caltech in economics and engineering at the same time. And then right after that, maybe even during that, you started a wireless antenna company that later the technology got acquired by Intel. And after that, you decided to go do some PhD in biophotonics and try to start another company in cancer diagnostics, a company called Genoptics with the co-founders. And that company became later a public company, and that got acquired by Novartis. So after two startups with exits, I'm assuming you were still very young, and he decided to switch sides from a founder to the investor side, and he joined a hedge fund in New York and start, spending time as an investor in later stage venture capital. And he did that for a while, but I'm just assuming, again, you probably saw a bunch of dreamers came and became doers, and you probably missed the action, and you decided to move to San Diego to start another biotech company. And that biotech company, Osman, started here. It raised almost $800 million. It's called Bios Therapeutics, and the company trying to reverse aging, turning back the biological clock. And at its peak, it was worth $12 billion. And I mean, that's the first time I saw you. You ended up being on the cover of Forbes magazine. So while all those numbers are eye-catching, the Forbes magazine, I mean, you have a bunch of subject matter expertise with those Latin words that I'm not going to try to pronounce here. But two things I really like about Osman. Like, number one, Osman has a humble outlook on life, infused with some quirky sense of humor, which I feel close to. So that's number one. And then number two is he takes these very complex problems and finds a way to look at it from a fresh angle and builds mental frameworks. So today he's going to share one of those frameworks, his 3 legs of a startup, shaped by his first-hand experience being on the both founder side and the investor side of things. And Osman rarely speaks in public. And even though he lives here in San Diego, I've never seen him speak in public. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Osman.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Sarat asked me if he gets anything wrong for me not to correct him. The one thing I would add is I ended up in San Diego, not by chance, but I was born and raised in Turkey. And when the time came, as he mentioned, we're both from a coastal city. Back then, everybody would go to the East Coast, New York or Boston. And I knew how cold the East Coast was. So I opened up the US weather map and I said, okay, Southern California, that's where I'm going. And then the rest is history. Now, today I didn't prepare any slides. I'm going to treat this as a casual conversation. After my talk, we're going to have a fireside chat. But even during my presentation, if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to interrupt me. And at the same time, what I'm going to talk about today is all, my subjective opinions. So my disclaimer is feel free to disagree with whatever I say as well. Okay, so the title for today's conversation is Vision to Venture. So I started thinking about what a vision is. Now, in most startups, the numbers. For every 100 startup, more than 90 of them go out of business. And the ones that make it to the end, there is a revisionist history approach where every founder claims they had this vision from the very beginning and it was all planned. It's BS. We all know that. Instead, I look at vision as, two sides of the same coin, vision and execution. And, one of my favorite quotes is by Thomas Edison, vision without execution is hallucination. So vision, in my opinion, it only makes sense in the context of execution. And it's more like a game plan. It's your North Star. There will be many decisions that you will need to make with incomplete or completely missing information. And vision is, kind of gives you the general direction you want to move forward to. It's definitely not fortune telling. And execution is the game plan, not a blueprint. So you have to go into a startup knowing full well whatever your original plans were are going to change. And at the end, you'll be lucky if you can recognize any original plan. And then the second word over there is venture. When I think of venture, it's really risk management. Venture is, there are so many different risks with every startup. Because if you knew what was going to happen, then it wouldn't be a startup. Somebody else would have done it before you. That reminds me of Anna Karenina, this novel by Tolstoy. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. So the rewards are all the same. You've made money, everybody's happy, everybody, tries to take as much credit. But the risks are very different. And I'll come to that in a second. So between this, vision to venture, when I think of a startup, everybody talks about the two major components, the user, which defines the commercial aspects of the startup, everything from market dynamics to whether you're getting market traction, etc. And then you have the data component, which is the technical piece. And what your product is, what kind of performance you're getting out of it, etc. I think a startup is really like a three-legged stool. And the third leg is money. And it's not just fundraising. At the end of the day, money makes the world go round. And there are all these nuances that unless you are able to incorporate those decisions, those plans from the beginning, then more often than not, you're going to end up with a very unpleasant surprise. And so will your investors. Now, for the rest of my chat, I'm going to dig into the money component a little bit more. But before that, I also want to mention that, user, data, money. First of all, these are not static bubbles that you put on a PowerPoint presentation. Everything's changing. These are dynamic flows. And the risks that I mentioned, they're all time dependent. They change over time, sometimes for macro reasons and sometimes internally. And I think the key is you have these three flows: user flow, data flow, and money flow. And as a founder, as the C-suite, or as part of the team building and growing this startup, the key is to make sure that none of these three flows end up becoming a bottleneck, because it's a matter of weakest link. If one of those flows gets stalled or starts moving in a different direction than the other two, then you're screwed. So I think of it as a IKEA furniture. When you take out the pieces, you don't screw the very first screw you have. You kind of iteratively tighten them up, and hopefully you follow the instructions properly at the end. So, coming back to the money flow, it's a really simple idea. You just need to follow the money. Everybody says follow the money. It's not a choice, but it's a requirement. And when you start following the money, you end up having to look into different types of stakeholders. The first one is the investors. That's obvious. Especially if it's a startup, you're most likely pre-revenue. So you're dealing with early stage VCs. Now, depending on your sector, what kind of risks your VCs are looking to you to resolve, to mitigate, are going to be different. If it's a biotech, the biggest risk is always the science risk. You have to go through drug development, animal studies, in vivo studies, and then you get into the clinic, human studies. And the biotech VCs usually say, we prefer novel and well-validated biological targets. Well, if you think about it, that's mutually exclusive, right? If it's novel, it means new, and not many people have looked at it, which means it cannot be validated, and vice versa. But what they're really saying is, whatever you can do in the early days, when the studies do not cost as much, and you're able to de-risk the science of this venture, then we'll be more than happy to throw more money at it for the more expensive late-stage clinical trials. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're working on a software company, AI or SaaS or whatnot. Now, there's no science risk. I mean, everyone knows and is willing to give you the benefit of the doubt that you can code, and you can put together a product and launch it. The risk over there is a market risk. And again, if someone has offered a similar product or is offering similar features, now that means there's an incumbent in the market. And now you have an uphill battle, or you have to develop something novel. And then now you have to deal with the market risk, whether the users will like it, will be willing to pay for it, and so on. And thinking about this whole thing from the VC's perspective, VCs are in business as well, and their business is to raise the next fund, their next fund. It's like politicians, right? Every politician wants to get reelected, while every VC wants to raise their next fund so they grow and they're able to charge more fees, get more carry, and so on. Well, that actually, there is a certain push and pull dynamic in that sense, because what the VCs are pitching to their LPs is, I'm going to make 20 to 30, maybe 30 to 50 bets, and I will be the one providing you the diversification that you want. So when they turn to the startups that they're looking to invest in, they're saying, I don't need you to diversify, just the opposite. I need you to be laser focused. I want you to do exactly what you promised me when you asked for my money, and nothing else. So from the startup's perspective, on one hand, the moment you get an institutional financing, when you do an institutional fundraising, the clock starts. And it's usually 2 to 3 years. You can stretch it a little bit. But the investors that are betting on you on day one are expecting you to give them a success story that they can then pitch when they're raising their next fund. So, from a timing perspective, this actually is a critical point, in my opinion. If you have no choice but to raise the institutional round, otherwise you are not able to, give your idea a chance, okay. But if you have the luxury, if you can postpone that starting point, I would say push it as long as you can, because there will be many other decisions, commercial, technical, especially regarding the money flow, that you will need to make, or at least get to an 80% level. And then you talk to a VC, but at that point, many of the other strategies that you need moving forward, you'll be smarter. So to give an example, let's say, investors is one type of stakeholder you need to pay attention to. Another one are the top dogs, the incumbents, the alpha players in your sector. Right? So again, if you're in biotech, you need to know what the insurance companies are doing. Because if they decide not to reimburse a drug, doesn't matter how, what the performance is like, no one's gonna pay for it, and that drug is going to die in the markets. And same with big pharma, right? Big pharma, if you're going to partner with them, they're effectively your distribution partners. Now, most of those deals are exclusive in nature, which means every big pharma has only so many bullets to fire. So they're not going to, they're going to look at every similar company in the market working towards a certain disease area, for example, and they want to make their bets, whether that's going to be one bet or two bets at most, they want to make that as smartly as possible. And another one is, from a competition perspective, when you ask a founder, what his competition is, his automatic thought is, okay, who's competing with my product? Who is offering features that are similar to my product? That's not the only competition he needs to worry about. Because let's say, it's software, okay? He's going to launch his product and start generating revenue. Well, what's his revenue strategy? If he thinks he's going to make revenue from advertisements, now his competition is not, other companies with similar products, it's Google, right? Because there's a finite amount of advertising dollars to go around. So if your revenue strategy is to steal market share in ad dollars from Google, you're going to lose that battle. And if you go through that, come up with a revenue strategy where you are not stepping on every incumbent's toes. Now, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and change your product. Because some of those revenue streams are going to be off limits to you. And then finally, again, with respect to these alpha players, at the end of the day, one or maybe 2 or 3 of them will be your prospective acquirers. If you do an IPO, great. But if an IPO is your only exit option, then now you're going to be taking some timing risk as well, because sometimes IPO markets shut down through no fault of your own. So now you need to either partner or get acquired. And if it's an M&A, now you have to think about, why would a prospective buyer acquire you? Is it because of your customer profile, client profile? Is it because of the diversified nature of the revenue? Is it are they going to be able to make their customers more sticky? You have to put yourself in their shoes and think through every little detail. And that's why I think taking that first institutional money is a huge deal. Not because it gives you a chance to get started, but because it starts the clock. And after you take that money, you will not have the luxury to change any of your commercial strategies. Right? You launch a product, you start making money, you're lucky enough to get product market fit, and your investors say, okay, we're going to double down, give you Series A, Series B. And you say, well, I changed my mind about revenues. I'd like to take a step back, take another year, change the product. That's not going to happen. And then, the last stakeholder in terms of the money flow are the distribution partners. Again, similar to the alpha players, these are all incumbents, more likely than not. And just like, an investor wants to raise his next fund, that's top of mind always. For a distribution partner, he wants to maintain the status quo. He wants to maintain his incumbency. So if you don't have the leverage, they're always going to ask for exclusivity, white label your product. They're gonna beat you into submission. And at that point, they're not going to say, oh, okay, I have a direct touch point with all my customers, but for you, I'm going to step aside. You can just insert yourself in between me and my clients. Yeah, that's not going to happen either. So with each of these 3 different types of stakeholders, the one, this is a side story, but when I was living in New York, this is October, November, the weather is getting cold. I'm standing at a corner intersection, and this homeless person comes up to me, and he says, give me it. Right? I turn to him and say, what are you talking about? He goes, give me it, and points at my shoes. Right? So I said, that's it? That's your pitch? Like, tell me you're hungry, tell me your feet are cold. Give me a reason to help you, to believe in you. You can't just, walk up to someone and say, give me it. So with each of these stakeholders, you cannot just go to an investor and say, give me your money. And then, they look at you, you look at them, and they'll walk away. So all of these strategies, planning, granted, you can't do these plans, in too much detail either, because things will change. But I believe it's critical that you go through these strategies and machinations and planning stages before you start the clock with your first institutional investor. And then finally, you know, I just have one, comment about being a CEO. I think the word CEO is a misnomer. Chief Executive Officer. I believe CEO's job is anything but execution. You have your whole team to help you with the execution. Your job, you're really a manager of these three flows. You're supposed to balance these flows, make sure no one is lagging behind, no one is going in a different direction. There are synergies between these flows, so on and so forth. And if any one of these flows is stalling, there is no partial credit. The company is going to fail. You can't say, oh, well, I was very good at user and data, but the money flow didn't work out, right? And I'll just finish with another favorite quote of mine with respect to a team. A camel is a racehorse designed by a committee. So when you're putting together a team, if there are too many cooks in the kitchen, it's going to turn out, some ugly creature that, yes, it has 4 legs, yes, it runs, but not what you intended to do in the first place. And I think one of the biggest roles a CEO has, other than managing the money flow and balancing the 3 flows, is obviously, people, he needs to surround himself with a solid team. And by default, everyone around that table is going to know more than the CEO in something. So it's not that the CEO gets to decide on everything, but he needs to decide on who has the final decision, who has the final say for any one matter in front of them. And I'm going to stop here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Osman. Maybe I can follow up on some of those points. I think one of my key takeaways in that 3 legs was the misalignment between the VCs and the founders, because that was a good analogy. Politicians are there for you because they want to get reelected, and then the VCs by nature, they are in it for the next round, the next funding round that they have to raise so that they can have the admin fees, so that they can operate and keep the lights on. So you have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. As an investor, you have deployed hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions, I don't know. So you have seen those 2 war rooms. You have been on both sides. What is it that the VCs misunderstand about the founders the most, and vice versa, even though they are working supposedly together?
I'll answer it in the opposite order.
Okay.
I think what founders misunderstand about the VCs is that founders would like to think that VCs are their partners and their job is to support the founders. This will sound a little bit callous, but for the VCs, founders are a product. And the people VCs pitch to are their LPs. Mm-hmm. Right? So, it's nothing to take offense for. It's like, if you're taking a company public, you go to iBanks, to a Goldman or whatever, and you start pitching yourself. Again, you are a product to them. They want to market you as a product to their LPs, to their investors. So I think it's important to recognize that distinction and not end up asking the VC, give me it, because you'll always be a product.
I see.
From the VC's perspective, I think there is a asymmetry in the exposure. If you're a VC, after a single year, you will have seen maybe 1,000 business plans, spoken to more than 100 founders, it's just you're in the numbers game. From the founder's perspective, that's not it. Founder thinks he's very unique. He's the only one doing this. He's special. And, there is this unrealistic level of optimism, which has to be there
Yeah.
for the founder to be able to accept all those risks and still go on. But maybe I would say the VCs misunderstand the emotional burden that a typical founder is under.
Especially, when you realize that less than 10% of all VCs have ever been a true founder, so that misalignment is more practical and I think technical right there.
I agree.
You made a great point because you said, yes, VCs needs to diversify, but they diversify by investing in, let's say, in a fund, 40 different founders and startups. And that's their diversification. And by nature, because they don't want those founders to change, because that's what the product they bought, then they care less about their failure with that one shot. And they better get there first so that they can make up their mind. How do you, you're a new fund venture group. I think I've seen a bunch of new fund venture group members, we're investor group. And we're trying to invest more earlier and earlier because that's where you can realize these moonshot opportunities, 1,000x's and so forth. So how do you bring that investing in the founder, the jockey, not the horse, early on, and then managing that misalignment, if you know what I mean?
That's the $1 million question. But I would say, when you're investing, as you pointed out, you bet on the jockey, not the horse. Mm-hmm. The reason is, if a founder has been there, done that, there's a better chance that he will have been exposed to such issues, problems, failures, and somehow figured out a way to push forward. If it's a good idea, but the founder is inexperienced, let's say, this is his first company, somehow, and I don't know how, but somehow I think the focus should be on the attitude of the founder, the coachability. Is he willing to accept criticism, especially if it's negative? Mm-hmm. Or he's like a pit bull and trying to convince you what he wants you to think? Because if there's a mismatch on that and you don't get the right vibe, mm-hmm. Well, again, if he's talking to, for every one person he talks to from that ecosystem, the investor has spoken to maybe 20. And, investors talk to each other from across the funds. They actually do more data-based analytics, research. Usually, from the founder's perspective, it's, I think, my gut tells me, let's go this direction and let's go for it. Mm-hmm. He needs to know his place. And I don't mean it in a bad way.
Yeah. And I think I'm saying, I sense that you believe that, there's certain type of founders for certain type of investors. That pitbull might be a good match for a pitbull liking, investor, but maybe that can be dealt with separately. And that brings also that chemistry, the culture component to this picture, which is also another question that popped up as you were talking about those three legs of a startup. Because after all those different flows, the user, data, money flow, there's people. And I know as a founder, as a serial founder myself, especially in the early stages, I thought of culture as a word in a management book, not really like something in the sky. And I didn't realize the magic behind the corporate culture and so forth. So can you tell me as a founder, in your evolution as a founder. How did you come up to the fact and dealt with that culture component?
Well, two ways. One, I'll start with the second one. Somebody once told me, culture doesn't happen, culture just is. Right? So if you start from the top, let's say you have a team of 10, 20 people. If you start from the top and say, well, we're going to build a team, a company with a certain culture that does this and that, as you pointed out, those are just going to be words for the remaining 19 people on your team. Because they all had backgrounds, they've all learned their expertise, gained their experience through decades, and who they are is set in stone, pretty much. Now, during the interview process, you try to get to know the person behind and not just look at his resume on paper. But, a 30-minute discussion is definitely not going to be enough for that. So I think it boils down to, once you get going, at least my experience, when I thought a team member was too toxic, no matter how valuable from an expertise perspective, I think you need to part ways. The moment you let that fester, it gets so much worse.
Is there a litmus test or a mental framework you use to decide this is a toxic person, this is it, or,
Usually I look for attitude. Attitude and coachability, I think, are key. They don't have to be nice, but they need to listen to what others are saying. And, if they get emotional and say, well, I'm the expert in this, you need to do as I say, that's usually end of the road for me. Because if you are the expert, well, teach us. Explain why your approach is the better one. And, do it in a constructive way. So we learn such that the next time a similar problem comes our way, we don't find ourselves solving the same problem over and over again. So,
are there any familiarities? Just to bring the founders and investors that have different mindsets somewhat together on the same, platform. Since you've been both, how would you treat of, let's say, interviewing and hiring a key employee versus as an investor trying to find the founder that you're looking for from an attitude perspective, not necessarily just the capabilities? Are there some commonalities that you're looking for?
Yes and no. So, key person, a person could be key because he or she has some, expertise that no one else has. He knows his stuff better than anyone else. That's easy. And some people are good managers of other people. I usually resist, someone, having been with us, let's say, after, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, people say, well, he's been around for so long, you need to promote him. Well, if you promote him, now you need to expand his role. And if his role includes managing others, and if he's a terrible manager, now you just shot yourself in the foot. So I think, with all the promotions and demotions and hires and layoffs, the one, I'm going to digress just a little bit. In Hindu philosophy, there are 4 sutras. One of them is about management. It's basically, it's a 1,000-page book, but if you summarize it, if you lead by love, people will exploit you. If you lead by fear, people will undermine you. If you lead by fairness, people will follow you. So in this case, as long as you are able to tell everyone on the team and yourself, look yourself in the mirror and say, I was fair, then I'm a big fan of just saying what I think is fair, doing what I think is fair, and then let the chips fall where they may. And in certain cases, the person in question couldn't handle it. And that was the Potomac 2 dance, two-step. It was the beginning of the end. But so be it. I think it's better to be transparent and honest to the fullest, and then, pose the question to the other person. See what he wants to do.
We talk so philosophical. Maybe I can bring down to a more tactical level. With your with that $800 million, fundraise, I think you raised funding from sovereign funds, VCs, family offices, very diverse group of very big investors. What are some of the tactical tips for negotiating terms would you give maybe early stage founders, as far as you know? What are the things that they should be thinking in their game when they're negotiating?
I would say, and I'm thinking out loud here, kind of, fundraising at the very beginning of a startup is similar to applying for colleges, in the sense that, the starting point for every student is, I want to get into the highest ranked, most prestigious college. But then, when you sit down and think through, what you have to offer, what you really want, what your passions are, you kind of change your mind and you say, you know what, I think I'm going to go for the best fit rather than the best, highest ranked college. So for a founder, I would recommend the same. If, a certain fund may be very prestigious, top tier, but if you don't get the feeling that they're going to be there when you most need them, if they're not going to take the extra time and the effort to give you advice, to give you market insights, and so on and so forth, if it looks like they're just plugging a hole in their diversification map, and that's why they're giving you the money, maybe that money is not the smartest thing you can do at that stage. So you need to pick your partners. Again, from the founder's perspective, an investor is a partner. You need to go for the best fit rather than the most
prestigious.
reputable.
I see. When I was doing research, and I didn't know this about you, I read that you won a very prestigious poker tournament in Vegas, and I'm not talking about just a poker tournament. Like, it was the first poker tournament that you joined. There were like thousands of or some number of very good poker players in there, and you won. So I'm just curious, do you see any parallels between a good poker strategy and a successful venture building? Other than good math skills, which I know you have, yeah.
Actually, some people think poker is all about calculating the odds. I would say that's like 5%. The equations are so easy, and you start doing it subconsciously.
It's for you, yeah.
I think, what makes the difference is not only are you able to read everyone else at the table, but are you able to read yourself? Sometimes you do a bad beat and emotionally you're off balance. And then that's when you get eliminated from the whole tournament in the next hand. So it's not just reading the individuals, but it's like, know thyself It's reading yourself. And also, there is a higher level of reading going on, which is, what's the dynamics like at the table? Is everyone playing loose? Is everyone playing too tight? And you need to adjust your percentages and the hands you play and the hands you fold based on what the rest of the table is doing. So, startup, founder, VC, putting all that aside, I think there are a lot of parallels in business regarding that. As I mentioned, sometimes you may have the best technology, which is, you have the best cards, the equivalent, but then they outflop you, right? They get lucky and they get ahead. So you cannot say, this hand belongs to me and I'm going to go all in with this. You need to adapt. You need to adjust. You need to be nimble and kind of assessing the dynamics around you the whole time.
Yeah, that's a great insight, I think, to finish, put the dot. But thank you for your great insights. And thank you for keeping the jokes PG. Yeah. I think we did really good. So
thank you. Thank you.